Well, good morning, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Emily Northrup. I'm a grants administrator with the State Housing Finance Commission. I just want to extend a huge thank you for joining us here at Housing Washington 2023. It's lovely to see all of your beautiful faces again. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us here in this breakout session where we're going to be offering a legislative update for housing for this year. And it's my pleasure to announce our panel of guests. I have Ann Fritzel from the State Department of Commerce, David Osaki from the State Department of Commerce, Kevin Freibott from the city of Spokane, where he's a senior planner, and then Elliott Barnett, who's also a senior planner here at the city of Tacoma. I am going to refrain from reading all of their illustrious bios, and we'll just get right into the chat because I'm sure these folks have a ton of information to share with us. I will ask that we hold all questions and answers for time at the end where I can come around and pass the mic so that we can all hear the brilliant questions we have to ask. And then at the end, quick plug for a survey. So stick around, we'll have a survey on the app and it'll let you rate all the great things you learned in this panel so that we can bring folks back. So I'm gonna cut it short and hand it over to Ann. So big round of applause for them. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the welcome, and thank you for coming to our session. We're going to hear today about legislative updates, new rules for housing. First, you probably know us as Department of Commerce. We strengthen communities, not just through housing, but through almost every aspect of community development. We're going to talk a little bit about the context. How do we get here today? And then we're going to talk about some of the changes that happened to the Growth Management Act. It's a little of an update. The middle housing and ADUs that we're all required to consider in our planning. And then we're going to have two example cities that really reached out ahead. So the city of Tacoma has been working on their affordable housing strategy for 3 or 4 years, working very strategically towards a new vision for housing. It's really quite fascinating. And the city of Spokane that just, hey, let's all do middle housing all of a sudden. And so these leaders are seeing development and have thought about the impacts of new types of housing, so they're going to share with us. So first of all, how did we get here? Oh yes, and that thing. I meant to say, put your phones on airplane mode.
The world is not ending, we promise.
This is a test, okay.
Airplane mode. Somebody in the federal government doesn't like middle housing.
This is not the first time that's happened during a presentation. Okay, after that moment from our sponsors. So let's talk about, in 2017, I worked on a report called the Housing Affordability Response Team, and that was, the governor said to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, oh my God, there's a housing crisis. You guys figure out what to do. And so we led a process that looked at some of the issues, like land use laws were part of it, housing financing, how we did permitting, and put out this report. And by golly, we've been working on some of those things. At the same time, we've been watching California and Oregon talking about mandatory planning and mandatory multiple unit housing. And so it's been interesting to watch that swell come north. So in 2019, the first thing that the legislature did was said, hey, how about we give you a grant program, and then you can adopt changes, such as adding multiple units, middle housing, ADUs, quick permitting. How about we just give cities a grant program and they can do it? And wait a minute, if you don't quite know what you want to do, how about you do a housing action plan? That's another thing that came up from California and Oregon. And we developed a lot of housing action plans. A lot of communities adopted strategies. That's part of what Spokane and Tacoma also did. But there wasn't a lot of code changes that were happening. We tried again in 2021, still some changes. But in 2021, the legislature said, okay, we're going to tell you how many housing units you need. And so that was a lot of work that Department of Commerce did to project that 1.1 million housing units over the next 20 years, considering the housing that we didn't build from the housing crisis and what we'll need as household sizes change, et cetera. And then in 2022, the legislature said, here's a boatload of money that you can use to adopt middle housing strategies in your communities. And we developed some tools and we put out about $4.5 million, but it was still difficult to get the widespread adoption that we believe the legislature was looking for. So about that time, and it was difficult for councils. These are difficult decisions trying to upzone.
It's very cool.
Oh, sorry, thank you. And so we worked with the Puget Sound Regional Council. They do a housing survey, and we said, well, let's expand that statewide. Let's see what Washingtonians think about housing. And they found that rents are too high. Statewide, this is an issue, that it costs too much to buy a home, that we need more housing options for all kinds of people, that we want walkable, compact urban development, and that we need more diverse housing types. We asked a question specifically about middle housing and said, do you need this? And look, it's overwhelming. It's over 60% of people throughout the state in every corner saying, yes, we need more diverse and affordable housing types. We asked, what about multi-unit housing in single-family zones? Should we allow this if they meet the standards? And again, overwhelming support for this type of housing. So this lets us know what people are thinking, and it gives confidence to elected officials as they make these decisions in their communities. Because one of the things, you know who goes to council meetings, right? People who have homes and who have privilege and voices, and maybe not the other people that really need the housing. And the last survey is, residents want government to do more. In every corner of the state, we want our government to do more. We want government agencies to work together to address housing, specifically the housing that's not being delivered to the market. And so we have some specific changes that we're going to talk to you about the market. We know that our population is growing, right? It's grown since I heard the only consistently growing state in the nation. And we are expecting to absorb another 2.5 million people in the next 20 years. And where are they going to go? How are they going to afford? And it's migrants. People are moving here for our economy, for the temperate climate, for our beauty. We need to figure out how to accommodate the people that are coming. And you've seen this slide many times before. It's half of the needs are at the lowest income level. And those are at multiple unit housing, multiplexes. Only really the more affluent people can afford single detached housing at this point. So we know that we're underproducing. The ones in yellow are the states that have most serious difference between the number of houses they need and the number that were produced. We know that the West Coast is some of the most expensive housing markets around, which is why these groundswells of the state planning for housing and state mandates for housing types have been coming up through Washington or California, Oregon, and now Washington. And we know that you've probably seen this, that the housing element changes. So we're producing the housing projections of housing need, and it's, here, let's go back here for a minute, for very lowest income segments through to middle housing, and also emergency housing and permanent supportive housing that we're looking at as well. So projecting needs by very specific categories, and then at the county-wide level, because that's how we've done population projections. We say, here's a low and a high. We think the population will increase in your county in the next 20 years. The middle has been very spot on. You as a county get to select where the population is going to be, put it through our housing tool, figure out what the household needs are going to be, and then sub-allocate to community within where you live. Tough choices, tough work. I'd like to recognize Laura Hodgson for all her work in producing this, and she's going to work with communities to do this over time. The local housing element has significant changes. Look at your land capacity, policies for moderate density housing, identify barriers. Here's that county-wide projection and how it's segregated. This tool can be used to sub-allocate to communities. And so what's that going to look like in your community? once you've accepted your population and recognized how much need is at the lower level, in your residential developments, residential neighborhoods, you're probably going to want to do some infill. Probably allow more accessory dwelling units, multiple units. Think about smaller minimum lot sizes so that you're able to put more units in there. And a lot of we're seeing that in the market anyways. In the downtown areas, adding more residential. In commercial areas, we have a lot of unused strip commercial in our communities. Can we put residential there? And if you have high quality transit, especially in the Puget Sound region with the $50 billion investment, it's really irresponsible not to think about how to leverage that investment and provide high density housing. And then the other piece, responding, I was going to say, and Governor Inslee talked about transit-oriented development this morning and the importance. And the other speaker talked about racially disparate impacts. And this is a required part of our housing element now, to look through the data in your community, understand, and talk with community members, understand what impacts may exist, and begin to undo that, those impacts. We have a lot of guidance on all of that, but I want to get to our speakers. And the housing element and the comprehensive plan element updates have to be done on this schedule. So a real opportunity for all of you to engage in local planning and review local policies and participate. One last standing piece that changed as we adopted a climate goal this year as well, and requirements for communities to look at climate impacts, also amending the goal for citizen participation and coordination, specifically including the participation of vulnerable populations in overburdened communities as we do this planning. So early and often has always been a cornerstone of public involvement for growth management. So I just wanted to bring that out. So I want to, Dave Osaki is someone I've known forever who's joined the Department of Commerce to help us on these initiatives. So he's going to talk about new legislation this year.
Great. Thanks, Ann. Thanks for everyone for being here today. And Ann, your forever is a little less than my forever, so.
Since I came to the country.
All right. It's a pleasure working with you, Ann, and everyone else at Commerce, including Laura. So I'm going to take about 10, 12 minutes talking about some of the legislative changes that occurred this year, keeping in mind that there's several bills related to housing that were passed this year, and I'm only going to focus on 3, and I'm going to try to get through these in about 10, 12 minutes, so I'm going to go really, really quick. But I'm focusing on the ones that I think are more public-facing, and what I mean by that are the types of bills that introduce certain types of development into neighborhoods where historically they may not have been allowed before, or may have been allowed in different types of formats or different types of regulations. I'm going to focus on, talk a little bit about House Bill 1337, which is accessory dwelling units. I'll talk a little bit about House Bill 1110, which is middle housing. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about House Bill 1293 that focuses on design review. But recognizing how little time I have, let me just point out a couple of items. On the Commerce website, on the middle housing website, there is an ADU, accessory dwelling unit guidance document that talks about the changes to the law that'll walk you through the requirements of House Bill 1337 and give guidance to local jurisdictions on how you can comply. We're currently working on model ordinances. House Bill 1110 directs Commerce to prepare and publish model ordinances within 6 months of the effective date of House Bill 1110. Effective date of House Bill 1110 was July 23rd. So Commerce needs to publish model ordinances for communities and provide them with guidance on how to address the requirements of House Bill 1110, and those need to be published by the middle of January. So really quickly, again, this is very high level. You know as well as I do when these bills get passed, there's little caveats that you need to consider, but I'm just going to focus on the bigger issues. And I'm also just going to say I frequently get questions about, now mainly from the public, about, well, what's the permitting level now that House Bill 1110 is in my community? Keep in mind that even though the bill gets passed this year, it gives jurisdictions amount of time to amend their development regulations to get these in place. And all the 3 bills I'm going to talk about today, a jurisdiction has 6 months after their periodic review deadline to have these regulations in place. Now, there's some cities that have kind of like been, I wouldn't say jumped the gun in a good way, that actually are moving forward with these regulations. But in general, you won't see these regulations in place as of today. So jurisdictions have some time to do that. So I want to talk about accessory dwelling units in House Bill 1337 really quick. up until about a year ago, all my background's been in local government. So it's not unusual to have a customer come to the counter and say they want to do an accessory dwelling unit. And I'll say, sure, what do you have in mind? And they'll show me something, and I'll say, well, you're good on this, you're good on this, you're good on this, but you're not good on this criteria, and you're not good on that criteria. Now, I'm a little more customer friendly when I talk to them than what I just said, but the point is, jurisdictions have requirements for accessory dwelling units, because you still have to get permits for accessory dwelling units. And as you can tell, all I need to do is tell somebody, you can't do this and you can't do this, and I never see them come back again, because those are barriers to their ability to develop accessory dwelling units. What House Bill 1337 does is it addresses some of the common requirements that local jurisdictions have for accessory dwelling units and tries to remove those barriers. So just by way of example, House Bill 1337 allows, in single-family zones, 2 ADUs on every lot. Typically, in the past, or in the past with jurisdictions I've worked for before, you might just allow 1. But this says 2, up to at least 2. And this is in for all the communities that are planning under the Growth Management Act and within the urban growth areas. You may not require owner to occupy the property. It is very common in current home accessory dwelling unit regulations to have a requirement that the property owner live in one of the 2 units, either the accessory dwelling unit or the main single-family home. That has been removed. Can't prohibit the sale of independent units. This is going to be very interesting because House Bill 1337 allows that accessory dwelling unit to be put into a condominium format for sale. And that increases the ability for people to actually have home ownership opportunities. I could go through this more and more. I mean, not allow an ADU of at least, though you must allow an ADU of at least 1,000 square feet. So for the last couple jurisdictions I've worked for, they've had limits on the size of an accessory dwelling unit, maybe 600 square feet maximum, 700 square feet maximum. Now that changes. You have to at least allow an accessory dwelling unit of 1,000 square feet. There's some maximum parking requirements for ADUs. The last jurisdiction I worked for required, regardless, 2 off-street parking spaces. Now, if you're within, I think, a half mile of a major transit stop, you don't have to have any parking for your accessory dwelling unit. And then there's some requirements on impact fees and limitations on impact fees. It varies, but many jurisdictions or some jurisdictions require an impact fee to be paid for an accessory dwelling unit equivalent to the value or an impact fee for the single-family home. And now the bill says it cannot be more than 50% of the impact fee for that single-family residential, the main principal unit. Let's move on to House Bill 1110 really quick. Middle housing, the Growth Management Act actually has a definition of middle housing now. I think the 2 key things are middle housing is supposed to be compatible in scale, form, and character with single-family homes. It's supposed to be that type of housing that kind of fits between our traditional single-family homes and maybe multifamily development. But it's supposed to be house scale in terms of character, form, and in terms of its relationship to single-family homes. And there are 9 types of middle housing identified in House Bill 1110, and that's going to be important when I talk about this a little later. Duplexes, triplexes, 4plexes, 5plexes, 6plexes, townhouses, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. A little bit of the basics on House Bill 1110. So House Bill 1110 does not apply to every jurisdiction in the state of Washington. There are 77 cities in the state of Washington that are subject to the requirements of House Bill 1110. 55 of those are in the 4-county central Puget Sound region. And by that I mean Pierce, Kitsap, King, and Snohomish counties. And they range in size everywhere from Beaux Arts Village, which is about 300 people, to the city of Seattle, which is about 750,000 people. So there's a wide range of cities and the characters that this House Bill 1110 applies to. House Bill 1110 kind of divides those 77 jurisdictions into 3 categories, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily based on their population. And so we call them tiers in commerce, and that's not in the bill itself, but it's a term that we're using to categorize these different jurisdictions by these 3 different groupings. And you'll see that the tier 3 is for those jurisdictions that are 25,000 in population or less. And I would say almost half or close to half of the jurisdictions that are subject to House Bill 1110 are those smaller jurisdictions in terms of population size. And then jurisdictions must allow at least 6 of those 9 middle housing types I mentioned that are in the definition. And the deadline, again, is 6 months after the jurisdiction's periodic review update deadline. So for the central Puget Sound communities, King, Pierce, Kitsap, and Snohomish counties, their periodic review update deadline is December 31st of 2024. That means that these jurisdictions for middle housing need to have the regulations in place by June 30th of 2025. And this is a little more detail. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but this is a little more detail. It's a matrix. Again, the 3 rows are those 3 tiers. So they're based on population. And then the middle housing requirements, there's some base middle housing requirements for the jurisdictions. And then there's an affordability bonus. So if you provide affordable housing, you get to go over and above that base. And then there's some requirements for if you're within a quarter mile of a major transit stop, and your expectations for the units per lot that you allow is going to be higher than that base. So you have a base requirement, you have some affordable housing bonuses, and then you have some higher expectations for the amount of units that you allow on a lot if you're within a certain distance of a major transit stop. And again, I talked about the model ordinances that Commerce is working on right now. We have a consultant team working on these model ordinances that we need to get published by the middle of January of next year. There's a lot of issues to address because the requirement in House Bill 1110 is for you need to provide a certain number of units per lot on lots predominantly zoned for residential uses. Well, that's not defined in the bill itself, so we're working on providing guidance on a definition for what that means. There's how do you measure a quarter mile walking distance to major transit stops. You can do a circle, or maybe there's some techniques or tools that you can do to do it a little differently. So we're working on that as part of our guidance. Lots with critical areas on them are actually exempt from the requirements of House Bill 1110. And that's a big issue because you may have some cities that have large areas of geologic hazard areas or critical area, aquifer recharge areas that by definition are critical areas and are exempt from the requirements of House Bill 1110. But we're going to provide some guidance that basically says, or could provide some guidance that would allow a jurisdiction or suggest that a jurisdiction might be able to allow middle housing within the requirements of House Bill 1110 on critical areas. And then there's some alternate paths to requirements. So there's some, and I won't get into those very much, but let's just say there's some alternate ways that jurisdictions can comply with House Bill 1110 outside of that structure that I talked about in that matrix. So what to expect? We'll talk about on ADUs. A couple of jurisdictions have gotten out and actually begun to do ADU reform. Kirkland and the city of Seattle being a couple examples. And you can almost guess when they actually did their reform based on these slides. So Kirkland allows now 2 ADUs per lot. I think they allow them up to 1,200 square feet. They eliminated impact fees and they removed all the maximum height requirements, and they made some parking adjustments for ADUs back in 2020. And you can begin to see that in 2021 and 2022, there's been some incremental growth in cottage housing and ADUs that have occurred in the city of Kirkland. The right-hand graphic is the city of Seattle. City of Seattle did some ADU reform in 2019 and did many of the same things on parking. They allowed 2 ADUs per lot, and you can begin to see that in 2020, 2021, and 2022, the amount of permitting activity that took place for ADUs. Now, we don't know what the trend lines on these are going to be, but you can kind of get a sense that that if you begin to do some ADU reform, that the public and the market will respond. And these aren't necessarily a lot more ADU units being permitted. I mean, Seattle's getting up to 1,000, and that's quite a bit, but keeping in mind Seattle's 750,000 people. But just think if you make these changes across the entire state, cumulatively, what some of the increases in ADUs and providing housing opportunities through ADUs may result in. And then I'll finish up just really quickly that Commerce is supporting the local communities in their planning efforts and efforts to implement these requirements. I mean, besides the guidance documents, there's periodic update funding for local jurisdictions. Any jurisdiction that's subject to the Growth Management Act will get some funding to update their comprehensive plans and development regulations. We have a middle housing grant program right now that we're advertising for jurisdictions to amend their development regulations. There's this Connecting Affordable Housing or Connecting Housing to Infrastructure program, which goes by the acronym of CHIP, and that allows for infrastructure improvements, grants for infrastructure improvements to support affordable housing projects. And then we have some permanent streamlining activities that will take place and some funding for that. That's still yet to be determined in terms of the actual amount, but there's this array of different funding that's available for different housing grant or housing programs. And then really quickly, I won't even read this, design review. Design review is one of those items where you can have a project that just caught in a loop in terms of this design review process. You can go to the design review board and they'll say, can you do this? You come back again. Then they say, well, that's not quite the way we thought it would be. Come back again. So then you have these multiple meetings for your project that are kind of stuck in this design review process. So what the changes to the couple different bills get at this, and I think the easiest way to say it is that design review now should have one meeting maximum, and that the standards against which development is evaluated for design review purposes have to be objective and clear, which means no more of this, well, the front of the building has to be consistent with the character surrounding development, because we're all going to have different views or perceptions of what that might be. It's going to be something more like 15% of the facade of the building has to be windows. And you and I should be able to both go out there and measure what 15% is and make that happen. So there's some reform going on in design review as well. And then finally, I'll finish up. Like I said, there's a series of resources available at Commerce on a variety of different issues, whether it's updating your housing element. That public opinion survey is also on the Commerce website. And then there's some communication tools. The ADU guidance, take a look at that if you're going to be working on ADU amendments. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're working on middle housing model ordinances that will be published on the Commerce website by mid-January. And this is a variety of different other information about resources from Commerce. And I'm going to put in a great word for Laura Hodgson as well. She's been a pleasure to work with. And so a lot of these items regarding the housing element update, she would be a good contact. And if you have questions on middle housing, you can contact me. So that does it. Now the hard part.
Just bring up yours. Ooh.
Hi everyone. My name's Elliott Barnett. Welcome to Tacoma. I live and work here. Thank you for coming. All right. So yeah, hear me and got my slide deck up here. So I'm here to tell you about what we here call the Home in Tacoma project. It's Tacoma's effort to really change our housing growth strategy from the bottom up. And we've been working on this for some time. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. And as I put this together, I was assuming that I was going to get a mix of folks who work for nonprofits and the affordable housing community. Wasn't quite sure who to prepare for. So hopefully I hit the right target. But this is one of like 100 different versions of this presentation that we have. And if you really find something that you're interested in, it's an active planning process right now. Tonight, we're going to the Planning Commission with several specific topics. In 2 weeks, we're going back with a deep dive on affordability and bonusing. It's like completely active right now. And if you live in Tacoma, please participate in the Home in Tacoma project. So Anne and Dave have already provided the background, and I think you already know that we have a real housing crisis, all the people moving to Washington State, the fact that incomes are not keeping up. We've got more and more people who are struggling to afford housing. So I won't tell you anything more about that. But also, housing affects everything. So here in Tacoma, we started this effort based in our Affordable Housing Action Strategy, but we did quickly realize that we're talking about very big changes, and they really affect so many different community goals. You know, we have a declared housing crisis in Tacoma. We also have a climate crisis that our council has recognized. And we're working on equity and transportation choices, all these different things, and the amount of housing and where people live connects with all those issues in a huge way. So early on in this Home in Tacoma effort, we went broad. We decided that if we're going to have this big change to our zoning strategy, we're going to do it right and talk very, very broadly with the whole community and really try to be holistic in the approach. But the fundamental thing is, yeah, zoning rules, they are in the way of meeting our housing needs. But changing those zoning rules is essential, but it's far from the whole solution. And so there's a role for everybody in this, and particularly for the affordable housing community. There's a huge role to get involved, advocate, help find solutions to the many different aspects of these challenges. So Tacoma did start with affordable housing. We have an affordable housing action strategy that we really looked looked hard at what is everything that we could do to try to make some progress on connecting people with housing. And there are 4 objectives. I won't go through all of them on the screen here, but it really was a list of everything that we could think of, every good idea that if the city has it in our power, if we could implement that, we could make a significant difference in terms of meeting affordable housing need. I will say that the AHAS, as we call it, talks about providing or creating 40,000 new affordable units over the course of a 10-year period. And even doing every single thing that the city has the power to affect, which was a dream scenario, it was, maybe 10,000 new units could be created. So it's just a huge need, and obviously we need to work on housing from all different angles. So then the Home in Tacoma project was born out of the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, and it focuses on just one specific goal, creating more homes for more people, as we term it in the Affordable Housing Action Strategy. So it's really all the middle housing stuff. It's changing our zoning rules to make more room, allow more housing choices throughout the neighborhoods of the city. We're also looking at integrating affordable housing bonuses into those neighborhoods. And then also actions to support growth. We wanted to have our eyes wide open that we're building a lot more buildings and a lot more people will be living in our neighborhoods. What does it actually mean to support all that growth? And from infrastructure to parks and schools and all that stuff. So, but going back to the 1950s, Tacoma was one of the cities across the country, like most cities, that adopted single-family zoning. And I think it's useful to just look back at that moment in our history as a country, because it just goes to show it hasn't actually been forever. It hasn't actually been that long that we've had the structure of single families only in such a huge area of our cities. Here in Tacoma, like most cities, it's half our land area, 3/4 of our residential area, zoned single family, and was that way since the 1950s. And even the basic rules of the R1, R2, R3 district, they stood for 70 years. But prior to that, our older neighborhoods had all these ranges of different housing types, just like older neighborhoods across the country. So first I want to say Home in Tacoma is focusing on our residential areas, all those mostly single family areas. But we have a long-standing kind of growth strategy that I think it's important to remember. You're standing in downtown Tacoma, and we've actually seen a lot of growth downtown and in our mixed-use centers over the last 5 to 10 years. So things are going well there, and I'm kind of not going to talk about that as the focus of our presentation, but important context. We're finally seeing growth after many decades of kind of slow growth in our urban centers. But then when you look at the residential areas, we've been trying things for years, 10, even 20 years. We started by trying to allow ADUs and having that go down in flames a couple of times. Like some of my colleagues who've been here longer, talk about the ADU wars. There was a time when ADUs were not okay and we're a political non-starter. But since that time, things have changed tremendously. So Tacoma has now allowed ADUs. Since 2018 or 19, you can build detached ADUs, and we're seeing a lot of them get built. We've been tinkering with the standards, changing how big the lot needs to be and things like that, allowing some middle housing through a residential infill pilot, things like that. So we've been tinkering on this stuff, but and with some good results. But now we're looking at just basically starting from not scratch, but fundamental change to the residential growth strategy. And this slide, I just thought I'd share, we are seeing some outcomes. Just our detached ADUs, since we started allowing them in backyards, 350 or so have been permitted. So there's a robust interest in building just ADUs, and that's just one of the housing types. So there's a lot of potential. So we went big with this Home in Tacoma effort, and what happened was we have two phases. In 2021, our city council adopted Home in Tacoma Phase 1, which was our comprehensive plan update. So we no longer have single-family land use designation in the Tacoma Comprehensive Plan. We have low scale and mid scale, which are two land use designations that basically say, hey, how big the building is and where it sits on the lot. That's what we care about. We're not going to care about how many units are inside the building, or a lot less so. So that's behind us, was adopted in 2021. Now, Home in Tacoma Phase 2 is developing the zoning and the standards, and we're doing an environmental impact statement to go with it. And like I said, we're trying to really think broadly and think about all the implications of these changes to how neighborhoods can grow. And we're doing a lot in terms of engagement. We have been trying to explicitly or intentionally engage underrepresented communities and voices in some innovative ways, or new to us at least. But we've also been trying to really engage with the development community, since they build most of this housing, as well as just the community at large. So the growth strategy that Tacoma now has from our Home in Tacoma Phase 1 is a middle housing allowed everywhere growth strategy. So this slide shows you all the light yellow areas. They were single family until 2021. They're now low scale residential, allowing a broad range of different housing types. Not quite allowing them yet because we're still finalizing the zoning, but we're getting close. And then we also set mid-scale areas, which are areas that are close to transportation choices. They're along transit corridors, or they're close to commercial areas, and there buildings can get a little bit bigger. You can go to 3 or 4 story multifamily, all transitioning up, and you can build really big buildings or very tall buildings inside of centers and downtown. So we were, cruising along, and then the legislature comes along and adopts some pretty big bills in the 2023 session. And we realized that we might have been kind of out in front with what we were planning to do. But then House Bill 1110 goes a little further. We were talking about allowing 3 dwellings everywhere with the possibility of more. Well, 1110 says 4 dwellings everywhere, 2 more if they're affordable. So we realized we're close, but we're not quite consistent with House Bill 1110 and the other 2023 legislative laws. So we paid a slight penalty in terms of needing to go back and rethink things, but our council has given us the direction to come into full compliance with all those state rules. So we now are back on track, and we have a zoning framework that does that sets up 2 low-scale zones and 1 mid-scale zone, as good as we can tell, fully consistent with all the state laws. Once we come out with our public review draft, we will hear if we missed something. But and also, I just want to say we're trying to be very explicit. Somebody asked in the last session about how do you decide where the biggest housing or the most housing is allowed. We're really trying to make that be based on transportation choices. So the buildings can be bigger. You can have more units when you're close to centers, transit corridors, parks, and schools, all because those are walkable areas where it's more opportunity for more people. And we're trying to be holistic. So we were going out to the community and asking this question, one of the main questions, which is how can middle housing complement existing neighborhoods? That was part of what the council adopted in 2021 as well. And so we've been having these conversations about what are those residential patterns that we want to try to be reasonably consistent with, even though change is scary. And so we're working on those rules, and they have to do with how big the buildings can be and how close to the street and how close to each other, things like that. We're also working on some issues like demolition. So we're opening up a huge area of our city. I'm running long, aren't I? Huge area of our city to a new development capacity, and we want to be ready for that. And we're trying to anticipate things like demolitions happening a lot more and have some solutions in mind. We're also looking at neighborhood amenities and infrastructure. So what's needed to support growth? There I'm speeding up a little bit because I'm going long, but there I'll just mention trees are going to be a big part of this Home in Tacoma package, because we heard very loudly from the community that they're worried about losing trees, that we need more trees. We're behind on our tree canopy goals. So we're looking at adding trees to this Home in Tacoma package. The housing development community has, going to look very closely at those rules. And then keeping housing affordable, more to the direct theme of our conference here. So long story short, we've had some market studies done, and middle housing is going to help. It's going to create a range of different housing prices and choices, far beyond creating a lot more choice than what would be allowed under our current zoning, but it's just not going to get to deeper affordability to low and very low income households. So we are looking at building in a package of regulatory incentives, and we're making all those decisions now about, are they voluntary, is there a mandatory component, how affordable, for how long, all those things. And a lot of that is directed by House Bill 1110 as well. So I know you can't see this slide, so I'm just going to say that the exciting news is that with the package that we have right now, our consultants who study the housing market, they think we're going to see a range of housing get built, at least in our stronger housing markets. So what this slide tries to show is you've got townhouses all the way up to multiplexes, and a lot of them are probably going to pencil for developers, and importantly, they're going to potentially be more profitable than building another single family house. So in other words, they're probably going to get built. And this slide, again, too many numbers, so I'll just summarize it by saying that the result is going to be a lot more range in terms of the price points that people would be able to, would need to pay to get into these housing types. The top, in a high market area, a single family house is going to cost $925,000 on average, newly constructed. That's pretty unaffordable. But then all the way down, if we start seeing townhouses get built, they could cost $330,000. So it's just going to have a very clear benefit. So wrapping it up here, we're still very much in our process. Go to the Home in Tacoma webpage to learn more, and reach out to me and other staff with any questions you have. And hey, get involved. This is going to take input and advocacy. There's a lot of work. Even if we adopt all this stuff and it's done and it's perfect, there's like a huge amount of engagement and involvement from the housing community that's going to be needed, and from lots of different group folks in the community. Thank you.
Is it open?
Yeah, just go to there.
Just like that.
And then from beginning.
Yay, okay. Hi, everybody. Once again, my name's Kevin Freibott. I work for the city of Spokane in the planning department. So my side of the world is more policy and comp plans and that kind of thing. I have no money and I give no money, generally. But I have been steeped in this discussion about middle housing for several years now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go really fast because I know we're all hungry, and I do want to have time for questions because questions are actually my favorite thing. So, but very quickly, I just want to give you an overview of what we were facing, what we did, and maybe even some discussion of some tools that might help you in the future. I do have the one online question. If you're here, raise your hand because you deserve a gold star, but somebody did ask a question beforehand. I'm going to try to get to that right at the end. So the key here is, yeah, we're in a housing crisis. I don't think anybody in this room is going to tell me, no, housing's great. But it's not like it hit us in the face overnight. There are things that cities watch. There are things that policy wonks like myself watch. We saw this coming, and unfortunately, that train was moving faster than we could work to change the track. We saw the rents going up. We saw the vacancy rate plummeting. The vacancy rate for rentals in Spokane was at 3% for a while, and I didn't sleep for a week. It was horrible. We knew rents were going to go up. We knew people were having difficulty finding homes. But if there's one thing out there that is difficult to make change, it's a city or a government. It does take time. Just to give one chart, and you can ignore the numbers, but I wanted to give you an idea of the magnitude of what we were facing. The orange line, the thick orange line you see, that was our population growth for the last few years. The dashed orange line, that's where we expected to go. We spoke earlier about the projections that the Office of Financial Management gives, and each county decides, this is what we expect. There's that dashed line for the city of Spokane. That's what we expected. And in 20 years, we thought we'd get to the blue dashed line. And then this happened. That represents 15 years of growth in 5 years. We panicked a little bit. That's extreme. It's not completely outside the realm of possibility. It's still within the cone of probability. If you're a nerd like me, you know what I'm talking about. But it wasn't great. And we very rapidly ran out of housing in all sectors. I'm not just talking about affordable. I'm not talking about single family. I'm not talking about rentals. Everything out, done, gone. So we panicked. We definitely panicked a little bit. But there were other factors to consider. This orange area that you see is every part of the city of Spokane that was previously zoned only for one thing: single family detached homes. Elliott talked about Tacoma was one of the cities, so were we. We had a very protective zoning code that said you could only do single-family homes in so much of the city. And it was very protective. I mean, it was at the comprehensive plan level, policy, everything said protect single-family homes. In fact, the first value for a residential in our comprehensive plan said protect single-family homes. Protect them from what? Nobody ever explained that part of the sentence, but it was there. Now, add into that those areas where it really isn't appropriate to put a home. You do not want people living on the runway at Spokane International Airport. Someone tried once, it was not a good idea. You need places for people to work. You need industrial, you need commercial land. So add into that area, this spread area is that area where we need to have, either we need to protect folks or we need to have those opportunities for other uses. What does that mean? If you wanted to build a duplex in the city of Spokane 5 years ago, 83% of the city was off limits to you. You couldn't do it. In fact, we had people over and over again coming into the permit office. I just want to build a second unit. I just want to build a duplex. I'm sorry, you're in the yellow. There's nothing we can do about that. It had to change. So we had an extreme growth. We had extreme demand. And then we had limitations on supply. Obviously, something needed to shift. So what we did is we started to have conversations. We started to do the studies that were required. We started to have those coordinating efforts that really teach us what is the situation. And that's what takes so much time. I know that sometimes we have a crisis. We want action right away. But honestly, the time we took, and I'm just listing some of the meetings, because someone taught me how to do the animation. I had to show it off. So, we did have those endless conversations with all sectors, and that was the key. At some of the sessions yesterday, some folks talked a lot about the NIMBYs. Just for fun, what's even more than a NIMBY is a banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And we had bananas. We had a crowd of bananas that were arguing that nothing could ever happen. And how do you face that level of opposition, especially politically? The city council has to be able to say, no, I'm going to do this because it's necessary and it's right. The best way to provide that tool for the city to be able to do the right thing rather than the popular thing is to be a part of the conversation. We had directed meetings with you folks. We had conversations just with housing providers, just with the folks that are providing services. In fact, and in my 8 years at the city, that was the first time I remember us having conversations targeted like that at the providers, not the builders, not the occupied. We knew what the NIMBYs were going to say, but we hadn't heard from everyone else. And that was the key. That was where the conversation shifted. And honestly, when I say more conversations than we can count, that list was about a year's worth, and we've been talking about this for a couple years, so that wasn't the full list. So obviously, in the city of Spokane, we needed to adapt. We had a comprehensive plan that was very protective and very exclusionary. We had to shift that. When you're talking about shifting the vision of a city, that's scary. That's terrifying. The number of NIMBYs and bananas increased exponentially. But because we had time to have those conversations and we looked at the problem, we had other voices in the room. We had other people saying, no, this has to happen. We need to do this now. That actually leads me back to the online question, and if you are here, I do have a gold star for you. I just have to go get it. And that question was, hey, we don't have lobbyists. How do we affect change? Hey, there you are. I found you. How do we actually influence the process when we don't have, the heavy lobbyist who's at Olympia every day talking about this? And I will say that the legislature at least this is my response, and I'm willing to let the state folks come in on this too. My response is the legislature is the beginning of the process. Yes, HB 1110 said thou shalt do 6 units in the city of Spokane, with 2 being affordable or being close to transit. Great. How do we get there? That's the discussion. And that's where you should engage. You can engage with the city government. I'm sure Elliott would agree with me. Please talk to us. We do hear a lot from the folks who are angry and upset, but as much as we would just love to hear from the folks who are actually doing the work, because you can inform and you can shift the process, you can engage the process without having to be part of the I hate this crowd. And it is far more effective that way. How am I doing on time? I got 2 more slides. Okay, awesome. And so that leads to this, which is really, you guys are the key, not us. We make policy, we make codes, but that doesn't come out of our heads as much as we might like it to. It comes out of our understanding of the situation. And also, that first bullet point, that's a big one. I don't know how many of you have ever thought, why is the city putting an apartment building there? We don't build apartments. And the number of times that I've mentioned to people that the cities don't build apartments, and they go, what? They don't? And I'm not saying those people are dumb. I'm saying that it's not well understood, this relationship between policy and the people who actually do the work. And, those relationships are important, and those relationships are hard. Cities move slow. We talk incomprehensible data for months on end, and we know that. But if you have that relationship and you having those conversations with us, and we have those relationships with you where we can say, hey, that city council meeting next week, could you come talk to the city council, please, and explain to them why it's more important to talk about the guy sleeping under the tracks than it is about the woman whose yard might get a little smaller? Can you come to that? Those opportunities, that's really the key. That's the essential tool that I hope you can take away from this. And honestly, for those of us in policy, we'd be thrilled to have you. My last slide, and I wanted to highlight something special that we did this time, and this wasn't our idea. This came directly from the faith-based organizations in Spokane. They reached out to us and they said, help. We want to be in this game. We want to provide housing. We have land. We have money. And there's a number of churches in downtown Spokane sitting on large lots that they don't necessarily need. We have another church up on the South Hill, Bethany Presbyterian. I'm going to keep using their name because I like them. They came to us and said, you know what, we had a fire last year. Our sanctuary is going to have to be torn down, and we don't want to rebuild just a church. We want to build a church and a housing development next to it where those folks can come and pay affordable or market rent. They're going to be kind of a mix. And by the way, we're going to provide for them community service and a community to be a part of. That was huge. We've been talking about community this whole conference so far. And to be able to say, we want to build housing and we want to give those people a community to belong to, that was a game changer. And they were a big part of our code amendments. I haven't talked a lot about what we changed because Elliott covered it. We stole quite a bit from him. And it was a similar thing. We're allowing more housing types everywhere. We've changed our comprehensive plan to make it clear that diversity of choice of housing is most important. And how are we getting there? We're getting there through these special relationships with places like the places of worship. This is Knox Presbyterian in Spokane, who I wish I could say that was housing, but it's not. It's their classrooms. But they're they're probably the most engaged church that I have worked with in my 20 years of planning. I'm on the phone with them every other week, and not in a bad way. Not a, Kevin, what the heck are you guys doing? But a, hey, I heard about this policy. What can we do to be a part of that? So, it is hard to move a city. We're obstinate and we're annoying. But if you can be a part of the process and engage, honestly, I think you can do wonders. And that's all after the legislative level. That's all at the policy and the codes level. So I'll stop blathering, but thank you very much. And like I said, happy to answer questions.
Thank you. I hope that these are two cities that are far ahead of everybody else, and it just shows how much conversation and how difficult it is to make these changes to zoning, and what a big thing it was to pass these bills this year that will fundamentally change the way we do zoning around much of the state. So we have 5 minutes for questions. Virginia.
No, you're on the spot
really
now.
good at talking loud, but that's unnecessary. I have been updating Bellingham's accessory dwelling unit handbook for my job right now with the new legislative updates. And one thing keeps coming up for me as I look at things is that even though we have all these new zoning allowances, we haven't changed the floor area ratio. I see, yeah, and I'm curious, I haven't heard anybody else talk about this, but to me, the floor area ratio is kind of standing in the way of getting density while still maintaining open space and landscape zone. Yes, please talk more about that.
I can only speak for Spokane, so hopefully you're talking about Eastern Washington. But one of the things that we've identified in the process and we've working really hard to change is that we had restrictions on floor area ratio. For those of you non-wonks in the room, that's the amount of floor space versus the size of the lot, basically. So if you have a low floor area ratio, you're gonna have a small building on a big lot. You get a big one, you get a big building on a lot. We found out that we were double regulating. We had regulations on floor area ratio, and then we were talking about setbacks and height and the shape of the building, which both are controls on how big that structure can be. So we've worked hard to eliminate one or the other, and then make them a little bigger. And the key there was to disconnect how many units or how many dwellings are inside that structure from the discussion around the size of the structure. And where we ended up was, we don't care if it's 3 units or 2 units. If it's the same size building, it doesn't matter. We'll talk about utilities and that kind of thing. But from a neighborhood perspective, what the neighbors see, they don't know.
Or counting multiple stories as floor area rather than...
Right, that's because there's footprint. Footprint is just that, basically if you measured out the foundation, that's your footprint. Floor area, if you have more stories, that's more floor area. And so in a lot of cases, we've eliminated the floor area in exchange for controlling things like height and setbacks and shape. So
I'll just say, all these standards work together, and each city will be a little different, and you'll need to look at how they all work together. But I think the larger point is just that, it's just sort of a new system, and that's why I think it makes sense to just kind of, right now it's just based so much on one house, one lot, certain size. That's all changing. It really calls for a deeper look at how your regulations work. We're actually adding an FAR tool because right now, you're going from, our zoning would allow a very large structure just based on setbacks and height. And all of a sudden, we're making it much more likely that somebody will add structures. So we're adding an FAR tool as part of that. But it's all works together.
it's a good question.
Other questions? And I guess if it's really hard to figure out, then we'll have a set of model ordinances that could just supplant your code if you don't get it consistent. Did we mention that?
No.
I have a quick question about the ADU. So one property is allowed to build 2 ADU and they can sell it. So my question is, after they sell the 2 ADUs, can they build 2 new ADUs?
So the question was, if you can have a house or a one unit with 2 ADUs, and they can be sold individually. If you sold the one ADU, can that ADU now build 2 ADUs? Is that, did I get that right?
That's actually the next question.
Okay.
My current question is, can the original house build 2 new ADUs?
Oh, after the other one has
After
been
they sold
sold?
them, they create 2 new ADUs.
Again, I can only speak to our side of, to Spokane's regulations. And what we did is when you sell that ADU, it's not a new lot. It isn't a land subdivision. So it's the number of homes and ADUs on the lot itself. Kind of like when at the keynote she talked about land banks, where you're buying the home but not the land under it. With the ADUs, you're selling the ADU but not the land under it. It's still a parcel. But that's how we did it. There are other tools to prevent that.
Well, we've come to the end of our time, so thank you very much to our presenters and for you to being here. And see you at lunch.